Hi YouTube, and welcome back to my random thoughts on Thursdays. I thought I'd bring you back to my kitchen and bring you along while I cook a really easy recipe for crock-pot chili. Alright, so thank you for joining me today. As I said, I am going to go ahead and I'm going to be making a really easy recipe for crock-pot chili. It's sort of my own recipe that I've kind of been inspired by just looking up lots of different crock-pot recipes over the years and then just kind of tweaking that to what I kind of like and making it really super easy with a bunch of canned beans and tomatoes and things. And you know, if you don't like using canned vegetables, I mean, you can use your own. You can use dried beans and cook them yourself ahead of time. It just takes longer. This is a much quicker way of making chili just by going ahead and using canned ingredients. So, and I also will mention a vegan version that you can make of this. The one I'm making is with ground turkey, but there you can actually use boca crumbles, which I'll mention in more detail later. But in general, it's a pretty easy recipe. So let's go ahead and get started. Okay, these are all the ingredients that you're going to need to make my very simple crock-pot chili recipe. It starts off with a ground meat or boca crumbles if you're a vegan. I have ground turkey here, and I personally prefer the 85% lean over the 90-something% lean just because it's less dry. But you can use ground beef, ground pork, heck, ground chicken if you want to, ground whatever. Or if, like I said, if you're a vegan, you can do the boca crumbles. The only difference with the boca crumbles is you don't need to brown it ahead of time. You just put it straight into the crock pot and mix everything together. So you can skip that step if you're a vegan and do the boca crumbles. So with the ground turkey, I'm going to go ahead and do a half of that onion and the olive oil, and I'm going to be browning that ahead of time before putting it in the crock pot and then adding everything together. And then I'm going to add black beans and pinto beans, although you can also put in red kidney beans as well. I tend to go, but I almost always use black beans, and then I either switch out pinto or red kidney beans. Just depends on my mood. But I wouldn't add a third can just because the 1-quart crock pot isn't going to take any more ingredients than this. All of this together is going to make that crock pot completely full. So you can't add a third can of anything unless you want to skip the tomato sauce and add more beans instead, which is an option. And then I have diced tomatoes here, and I happen to like the Muir Glen fire roasted diced tomatoes because I think the fire roasted makes it particularly flavorful, although any brand of diced tomatoes is fine. I would avoid crushed tomatoes unless you want your chili to be more soupy. Otherwise, go ahead and do diced tomatoes if you want it to be more chunky. So that's the difference there. And then for seasonings, I do onion salt, cumin, and chili powder, of course, because it wouldn't be chili without chili powder. And that's basically everything that I'm going to go ahead and put in my chili today. Alright, so the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and prepare this onion. And the first thing I always do is I always cut off the two ends. Get those off the board there. And then take off the skin. And this might seem wasteful, but I just kind of take the first good layer off. That way it's just easier to peel all the skin off. Put that kind of all back there. All that off the cutting board. We don't want any skin. Alright, then I just go ahead and I chop it in half. I will save this half for later for either another polo chili or something else. And then I'm going to go ahead and dice this. And I dice it by, first I slice it through this way. Making sure I don't cut my fingers in the process. And then I just cross-cut this way, and we have diced onions. Who needs any of those fancy dicers? This isn't all that hard. I always make sure that my onions are refrigerated. That way you're less likely to cry, because they're less... they're just cold, and so the acid and stuff doesn't waft up to your eyes as quickly. Alright, so the onions are diced. We're going to go ahead and put this in the pan. Alright, so I'm about to start cooking, so I'm going to start with about a tablespoon or so of olive oil. like so. Turn my heat on high. And start with the onions. Alright, so I always like to get my onions cooked first, and I like to get them nice and browned before I start adding the meat, because it kind of adds a good flavor to the meat before I add it to the chili. Alright, so onions are now sizzling nicely. I'm just going to wait until they turn just slightly golden brown. Alright, they are just now starting to turn just slightly yellow brown. Just slightly. I don't know if you can see it on the camera, but they're just about perfect where I want to add the turkey. So here's the turkey. It's about 1.3 pounds of turkey. Okay. I usually get about a pound or so, one way or the other. I try not to go as high as 1.5 pounds. Now the trick with ground meat of any kind is you have to keep it moving so that you can get that nice ground effect, otherwise you get a big kind of brown block of meat, and you don't want a block of meat, you actually want ground looking meat. So if you've never cooked it before, this is basically the process. You just kind of have to keep breaking it apart and making sure it gets nice and crumbly. Has now been browned, and I've actually gone ahead and cooked it all the way so it's completely cooked all the way through, because I started a little late today, and so I can't keep it in the crock pot for 4 or 5 hours. So I wanted to make sure that the meat was completely cooked before I start making the chili, just so that, you know, everything is properly cooked beforehand. If I had started this 3 or 4 hours ago, I probably would have stopped the browning process sooner and put it in the crock pot, only being about half cooked, because it could cook the rest of the way in the crock pot. But because I'm a little short on time today, I went ahead and just cooked it all the way through. But the brown meat is now done, and we are ready to go ahead and put this in the crock pot. Alright, so the crock pot is already set on high. And we're going to go ahead and add the meat that we just browned. And again, for those of you who are vegan or vegetarian, this is the part where you can start, you know, just pretend this is Boca crumbles instead, and this is where you start with just adding the Boca crumbles to your crock pot rather than the browned meat with the onions. And of course you can always go ahead and just brown some onions and add that to your chili if you're using Boca crumbles instead. Alright, so now I am ready to add the rest of the ingredients. I've already gone ahead and taken the tops off of all my cans, and for my beans I've rinsed and drained them because I don't like the liquid that comes in the canned beans. So I like to drain that out and rinse them out a little bit first. So we start with the diced tomatoes. Put those in there. And then I try and mix them in with meat first before I add anything else, just to kind of get it nicely mixed. Okay, now comes the tomato sauce. And this is one of the reasons why you don't want the crushed tomatoes, because the tomato sauce is already fairly fluid, so the diced tomatoes just keep it from getting too soupy, and it's nice and chunky instead. Get that nicely mixed in there. Now we're going to add the black beans. Get those suckers out of there. And the pinto pinto beans. And as you can see, like I said, like these ingredients is like just exactly enough to fit into this 1 quart crock pot. Any more and it's going to overflow. So get it nicely mixed. And now I'm going to add my onion salt. And I don't measure, I just kind of go by feel. So I apologize if I don't really have, I always do to taste, and so you just kind of put in a little bit, taste it, put in a little bit more until it tastes the way you want it to. And next I do the cumin. And finally the chili powder. And I don't favor any particular brand, I just get whatever happens to be available. Alright, and I try and put a bunch of chili powder in, so it tastes like chili. And give that a good mix as well. I'm going to go up from the bottom and stir it around just to kind of get it nicely mixed. Alright, so now it's ready to just kind of sit here. I'm going to have it sit for at least 1.5 to 2 hours. Like I said, if I had started earlier, I could let it sit for at least 4 hours, maybe even 5, and have the ground meat not be fully cooked. But at any rate, now it's just going to sit here. I'm going to put the top on. And there you have it. One nice crock pot of chili. In a couple hours, we'll be ready to eat. Okay, so thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed this recipe, and I hope you have a chance to try it out. If you do, let me know in the comments below what you think. And join me next month. I may do a stir-fry recipe or one of my other healthy, low-carb recipes that I enjoy making. Until next week, though, bye-bye!